Medici, how to set up and play. The first thing you'll do is lay out the game board. I'm setting this up for a 3-player game, so each player will get a token at the bottom rung of each of the 5 goods tracks. You'll next place out the scoring track or the good markers for each of the 5 goods, and then you'll add the round markers. So the game is played over 3 rounds, and so these tokens will be used to mark round progression throughout the game. The goods tracks correspond to the different types of cards in the deck. So the 5 goods are represented by different value goods cards. You can see for each good there's 2 5s, a 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0. Each card represents one quantity of that good, while the number represents the value of that good. So a 5 and a 0 will both count as one quantity of fur, but they have different values, and you'll see how the scoring is different. There's also 1 gold card in the deck. It doesn't correspond to a good, it just brings with it 10 value points. Once you've shuffled all the cards together, we're going to remove a number of cards based on the player count. So you can see in a 3-player game, we're going to use 18 cards but remove 18 from this deck. Whereas if it was a 6-player game, we'd use all the cards in the deck. And these cards are going to be removed at the beginning of each round. So at the end of the first round, we'll reshuffle the entire deck back together and randomly remove 18 cards. So we'll do that at the start of each of the 3 rounds. Players will also get a number of starting florins or money based on the player count. So in a 2 to 4-player game, they'll get 40, and in a 5 to 6-player game, they'll get 30. So since I'm setting this up for a 3-player game, I'm going to put all player markers on the 40 spot. Money is victory points in the game, so at the end of the game, the player with the most money or florins is going to win the game. But throughout the game, they're going to need to spend those florins to win various auctions to enable scoring in each of the different categories. At the end of each of the 3 rounds, players are going to receive florins based on the value of their ships, the numbers on the cards. They're also going to receive florins based on the quantity of goods that they've collected and where they rank in comparison to the other players. All players will get a player board that has 5 cargo spots for goods. The only major difference in a 2-player game is in a 2-player game, each player will add on this extra player board, which gives them 7 total cargo spots. The start player for each round is always the player with the fewest number of florins on the money track. Since it's the start of the game and it's tied, we'll just randomly determine a start player, and pink was selected. So it's always whoever has the fewest florins, and if there's a tie for that, determine the start player randomly at the beginning of each of the 3 rounds. On the active player's turn, they're going to draw between 1 and 3 cards as the auction. And they can decide after each card draw whether to continue. So they could stop and they decide this would be a 1-card auction, or they could draw another card. Once they draw the card, they can't change their mind. So now they'll decide, do I want this to be a 2-card auction, or do I want to go to the maximum and make this a 3-card auction? It's important to remember that at least 1 player has to be able to accommodate this quantity of cards. So let's say later in this round I had filled up 4 of my cargo spots. I can still draw 3 cards as long as 1 other player can accommodate that. Once the cards for the auction have been set, we'll go clockwise to the player left of the start player. They will get the opportunity to make the first bid. They can decide to pass or bid 0, or they can bid a minimum of 1. The maximum they can bid is based on how many florins they currently have on the money track. Now they only get 1 opportunity, so it's a one-time bid, and then it will proceed clockwise to this player. They can exceed the bid, and then the start player will always get the final chance to bid on the auction lot. the minimum amount to win an auction is always 1. So if this player bids 0 and this player bids 0, the starting player could get this for a bid of 1. If all players bid 0, the cards are simply discarded face up, and then play would proceed clockwise. But in this example, this is a good lot. So let's say the first player bid 10, the second player bid 13. As the start player, I get the final opportunity. I'll decide to bid 14, and I take these immediately into my cargo spots. And then my floor and track would be reduced by the amount I paid as my bid. Regardless of who wins the auction, or if nobody won the auction, play will always proceed clockwise. So you'll pass the start player, and this player will now become the active player. They will draw between 1 and 3 cards, and will repeat the process. If they decide to draw all 3 cards, and it got around to me, I am no longer eligible to even bid on the lot because I could not accommodate it. And once your ship is completely full, obviously you can no longer bid on any other lots, but nor could you even start an auction. So if other players still had open cargo spots and the start player passed along to me and my ship was completely full, it would simply bypass me and go to the next player. Play will proceed until one of 2 things happens. If the card deck completely runs out, that will automatically end the round, or will proceed until everybody except 1 player has completely filled up their ship. So if this was the game state, we could see this player has filled up their ship, but both these players have open spots, so we'd continue. And let's say this player was the start player. They pull 1 card. They could draw another one because that player could accommodate it, but they'll decide, I'm just going to auction off 1 card. Let's say that player bids 5. This player bids 6 to get it. So they pay the florins. They immediately add it. Now all players have filled their ships but 1. This player will now just get random cards drawn from the top of the deck added to the remaining cargo spots. If the deck became depleted, they would simply try to fill up their cargo holds with as many cards that were remaining. Also remember, the player that got those random cards from the top of the deck, they do not pay anything for those cards. So those are free cards drawn to fill their remaining cargo spots. At the end of the day, we're now going to go through scoring. The first thing we do is determine the total value of your ship. And you do that simply by adding the numbers on the cards. So I can see this player has 22 total value. And if I look at the other players, this player has 16. And this player has 16. So this player has the highest total value ship. Those players were tied for second. This is where you consult the scoring card. So in a 3-player game, the player with the highest value ship would score 30 florins. And so we'd instantly update their spot on the money track. And then we'd see the player with the second highest value ship would get 15 florins. Since there's a tie, any tied players would sum the tied places together, so 15 plus 0, and then simply divide those and round down. So each of those tied players for second place would get 7 florins in this example. If this was a 4-player game and those 2 players were tied for second, they'd take 20 plus 10, 30, and each player would get 15, and the next highest player would get the next place, which would be 0. So based on the player count, you're going to score based on who had the highest value ship. Once you've scored for ship value, now you're going to score for quantity in each of the 5 types of goods. So you can do this 1 good at a time, and you can do it in any order. Let's start with grain. So each player will move up 1 rung for each card that they have in that type of good. So we can see the white player has 1 grain card. So they're going to move up 1 rung on the grain track. The pink player also has only 1 grain card. So they'll move up 1 spot. And we'll see that the yellow player has 3 grain cards. Again, the values don't matter, it's just the quantity of cards. So since they have 3 grain cards, they're going to move up 1, 2, 3 on the grain track. Next, you'll consult the scoring card based on the player count, and we're simply scoring for the player that has the highest quantity and the second highest quantity. So since this is a 3 to 6 player game, the player with the highest quantity would get 10, and the second highest quantity or current position on the track. That's important to remember because these positions, these are never going to reset. So when we go to the next round, this yellow player is going to start there, so they could advance this further, or other players could catch up to them. So whoever's currently the highest on the track gets 10, and the second highest player gets 5. So in this example, yellow would get the 10. We could see white and pink are tied, and so just like in the other scoring, they would have that value rounded down, so each of the 2 players would get 2 points. In addition to whoever's first and second highest, you can score additional points if you've reached the highest rungs of the track. So if this player, let's say this was later in the game, and they were all the way up here, they would get the 10 points for being highest on the track. In addition, they would get another 10 points or florins immediately for having achieved that level. So you can see the highest level pays 20. And this will get scored every round in each of the 3 rounds based on the current position. So these bonus florins are paid in addition to what a player may receive if they came in first or second on the track. Once we've completed scoring for a specific good, we'll just turn over that marker and we'll proceed to one of the other goods until we've scored each of the 5. Once all 5 have been scored, we'll take this round marker off to indicate that we have 2 rounds of the game left. Every player will retain their position on the goods track. All cards will now be returned and reshuffled along with the ones that were removed from the round. So you'll reshuffle all 36 cards and then remove again based on the number of players. So we take out those 18 cards again to create the draw deck for the next round. The start player for the next round will be the player with the fewest florins. The game will end at the end of the 3rd round, and the player with the most money wins the game. If there's a tie, that's a shared victory. And that's everything you need to set up and play Medici.